The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Even the shuffling of papers from the bailiff seemed softer than usual, as though the room itself anticipated the storm that Judge Eleanor Grayson, known on television screens across the country as Judge Grayson, would inevitably unleash the moment she entered. And then, as expected, the door behind the bench swung open. Judge Grayson walked in with the same firm, uncompromising stride that had defined her decades-long career. She didn't look left or right. She didn't smile. She simply approached her seat, lifted her robe slightly, and sat down with the regal authority of a queen accustomed to being obeyed. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. "You may be seated," Judge Grayson said, in a voice sharp enough to slice paper. Today's case involved a mother, a daughter, and a man who, according to the paperwork, was neither a husband nor a fiancé nor an official roommate. Instead, in the judge's own words, he was what she called a living with you person, an LWYP, as she joked to the audience before cameras rolled. Someone who existed in the blurry gray zone of modern relationships, present but without title, dependent but without obligation, attached but without responsibility. Her eyes moved to the plaintiff's table. On the left side sat Carissa Hahn, a young woman in her late 20s, her dark hair neatly tied back, her expression earnest but strained. Beside her sat her mother, Helen Hahn, a woman in her 50s with warm eyes, salt and pepper hair, and hands that moved rapidly as she signed small comments to her daughter. Helen was deaf, but her presence was powerful. Even without a voice, she commanded respect. On the right side sat the defendant, Kyle Taylor, a man in his mid-30s with a weary look, an expression forged by years of unstable housing, low-paying jobs, and, according to the claim, severe dental problems. The amount in dispute, $828. The claim, money lent by the mother to pay for Kyle's emergency dental procedure. The defense, Kyle asserts it was a gift, not a loan. Judge Grayson glanced at the case file, then raised her eyes. "Let's begin, Ms. Hahn," the judge began, looking at the daughter. "This is your mother sitting next to you, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And the gentleman at the defense table, this used to be your boyfriend?" Carissa hesitated. "Somewhat, yes. We never officially titled it." The courtroom audience chuckled lightly. Judge Grayson leaned forward. "So he wasn't a boyfriend, wasn't a fiancé, wasn't a husband. What was he? An emotional support human." More laughter. Carissa tried to smile. "Well, Your Honor," she said, "he lived with me." "Ah, good. Then I know exactly what to call him," the judge declared. "A living with you person, LWYP. A highly modern title for a highly modern, sort of responsibility-free arrangement." The judge then turned her attention to Kyle. "Mr. Taylor," she said, "I understand you developed a toothache." "Yes, Your Honor. Not just any toothache, but one caused by an exposed nerve." "Yes. Let me tell you something," the judge said, pointing a finger for emphasis. "My father was a dentist. My brother was a dentist. I grew up in a house where the living room was full of people with exposed nerves, crying, moaning, sometimes clutching their heads like they were trying to keep it from exploding. That kind of pain is unforgettable." Kyle nodded. "It hurt pretty badly," he admitted. "And this was a tooth that required a root canal?" the judge asked. "Yes." The judge tapped her pen loudly on the bench. "Of course it did. Exposed nerves don't fix themselves. If they did, dentists would go out of business, and we'd all be chewing on bricks by now." Laughter again. "Now," she continued, "you didn't have money to fix this tooth, correct?" "No." "So what were you planning to do?" Kyle shrugged. "Deal with it." Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Deal with it? My dear young man, you cannot deal with an exposed nerve. That's like trying to deal with a hurricane by politely asking it to leave your home alone." "Well," he said defensively, "I've had teeth pulled before. I can tolerate pain for a few months until I can get it pulled." "Pulled by whom?" the judge asked. "A dentist? A bartender? A mechanic? A friend in a garage?" Kyle shook his head. A dentist, Your Honor. So you were going to let this nerve stay exposed for months until you could afford the cheaper option. Extraction? I guess yes. Judge Grayson sighed, then turned to the mother. Ms. Hahn, she said, addressing Helen. You lent him the money for the procedure? Helen nodded and signed something to her daughter. She says yes, Carissa interpreted. She paid the $828 directly to the dental office. And Mr. Taylor, the judge said, turning back to him, you claim this was not a loan, but a gift? Yes. The judge closed the file, leaned back, and tapped her pen again. Slowly, rhythmically, ominously. This, she said, is going to be interesting. Before she could approach the money dispute, Judge Grayson wanted to understand the household dynamics. Mr. Taylor, she began, before you moved in with Ms. Hahn, where were you living? In Beaverton, Oregon. In a house. With whom? With a roommate. And what happened to that arrangement? My roommates weren't paying the rent. So the rent wasn't being paid by anyone? Pretty much. And the landlord evicted you? Well, I left before that. Where did you go? I stayed in my car for a bit, then with a friend. The judge let the silence hang. So, she finally said, you had unstable housing, low income, and significant dental problems. And Ms. Hahn, this woman you did not officially date, allowed you to live with her. Did you pay rent? No. Did you pay utilities? Gas? Electric? Water? Internet? Cable? No. What did you contribute? Food and cigarettes. The judge blinked slowly. Food and cigarettes, she repeated. For both of you? Yes. She turned to Carissa. This was acceptable to you? Carissa shrugged slightly. At the time, yes. Young people, the judge muttered. You would let a man live in your house, eat your food, sleep under your roof. But the moment he buys cigarettes, he feels like a financial hero. Laughter. But then her expression sharpened again. Ms. Hahn, she said, you asked your mother to pay for his dental procedure? Yes. And your mother agreed? Yes. Judge Grayson gestured to the older woman. A mother who is deaf, communicates through her daughter, and still opens her wallet to relieve the pain of a man who contributes nothing but cigarettes. Kyle looked uncomfortable. Let's get to the issue, the judge finally said. Was this money a loan or a gift? Judge Grayson leaned forward, folding her hands over the bench. The room quieted instantly. Everyone recognized the posture. It meant she was about to dig into the heart of the case. Ms. Hahn, she began, you asked your mother to pay this dental bill for Mr. Taylor. Did you tell him it would be a loan? Yes, Your Honor, Carissa replied firmly. I made it clear. My mom doesn't just give out money. She's generous, but she expects repayment. And Mr. Taylor, the judge said, you claim no such conversation occurred. Kyle shook his head slowly. No, Your Honor. They were talking in front of me, but not to me. Her mother is deaf. They were signing. I wasn't part of the discussion. The judge's eyes narrowed. Let me make something extremely clear, Mr. Taylor. You do not have to understand a conversation to be present for it. You do not have to be addressed to be aware of what's going on. You were in the room. Correct. Yes. And you watched the conversation taking place. Correct. Yes. Did you believe they were discussing the weather, recipes, the migratory pattern of geese? A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. No, Your Honor. I assumed it was about the tooth. Good. So you understood the basic context. Now, Ms. Hahn, after this conversation with your mother, did you relay anything to Mr. Taylor? Yes. I told him my mom agreed to lend the money. Lend? The judge repeated, enunciating the word. Not give. Not donate. Not gift. Lend. Yes. Mr. Taylor, the judge said. Did you respond to this statement? Kyle looked trapped, as though the walls were slowly closing around him. I don't remember exactly. Let me help your memory, the judge said dryly. Your response, whether spoken or implied, was something along the lines of, thank you. Correct. He stared down at his hands. I mean, yes. The judge lifted her eyebrows triumphantly. People do not say thank you for loans they believe do not require repayment. They say thank you for kindness they recognize and intend to honor. She turned to Carissa again. Did your mother pay the dental office directly? Yes, I took her to the clinic. She signed for the payment through the receptionist. And Mr. Taylor received the procedure? He did. And what happened after that? Carissa took a breath, gathering herself. He continued living with me, but he never paid my mom back. Not even $1. The judge then looked to Helen, the older woman. Ms. Hahn, do you wish to say anything? She asked gently. Helen raised her hands and signed calmly but with conviction. Carissa interpreted. She says she doesn't hate him. She didn't help him out of anger or pity. She helped him because he was in pain. But she expected him to be a decent man and repay what he owed. The judge nodded slowly. A very reasonable expectation. She then shifted her gaze toward Kyle, who now appeared significantly smaller in his chair. Mr. Taylor, the judge said, did you ever once offer partial repayment? A single installment? $10? $5? Even $1? Kyle hesitated.
No.
The judge closed her eyes and sighed dramatically. Why am I not surprised? Ms. Hahn, the judge said, do you have any written communication between you and Mr. Taylor about repayment? Yes. Messages. Show them to the bailiff. The bailiff retrieved a neatly printed set of screenshots and handed them to the judge. Judge Grayson adjusted her glasses and read silently for a moment. Then her eyebrow slowly rose, a sign she'd found something compelling. Mr. Taylor, she said, this message from Ms. Hahn reads, my mother needs the money back when you get paid next week. Correct? Yes. And your reply, this is your number, correct? Yes. Your reply says, I will handle it. Stop stressing. Kyle swallowed hard. Mr. Taylor, the judge said with a growing edge in her voice, a man who believes he received a gift does not say, I will handle it. A man who believes he has no obligation does not offer a repayment timeline. She placed the papers down and leaned forward with both elbows on the bench. Her eyes locked onto his. At what point, Mr. Taylor, did this magically transform from a loan to a gift in your mind? He looked down. I thought since things were falling apart between me and Carissa, maybe they didn't expect it back anymore. The judge's laugh was short and sharp. Oh, so when the relationship ends, the debt disappears? How convenient. What a delightful financial system that would create. She straightened up again. Let me be clear, Mr. Taylor. Emotional fallout does not erase financial obligations. Breakups do not cancel debts. If they did, half the country would be leaving relationships with brand new cars and unpaid bills. The audience erupted into laughter again. Kyle sank deeper into his chair. Judge Grayson closed the file and placed her hands flat on the bench. I have heard enough, she declared. The room fell into absolute silence. Here are the facts, she continued. You needed a dental procedure. You could not afford it. Ms. Hahn's mother paid the bill directly. You acknowledged this arrangement. You promised repayment. You made no effort to repay. You benefited. They were burdened. That is the legal definition of a loan. She turned toward the plaintiff's table. Ms. Hahn, your mother will receive judgment. Then she turned to Kyle, her eyes cold as steel. Mr. Taylor, you will repay the $828. And let me add something not included in the monetary judgment. You should be deeply grateful that this family helped you at all. Few people would have. She banged the gavel. Judgment for the plaintiff. The courtroom emptied slowly after the ruling. Some spectators whispered to each other about the case, shaking their heads in disbelief about how someone could live rent-free, accept $828 for dental pain relief, and then still argue it was a gift. Others simply admired Judge Grayson's sharp wit and decisive clarity. At the plaintiff's table, Helen placed her hand gently on Carissa's arm, signing something subtle but warm. Carissa nodded with a small smile. The mother was not celebrating because she had won. She was relieved because justice had been acknowledged. She never wanted the conflict. She certainly did not want a public dispute with a man who had once lived under her roof and shared meals with her family. But she had been raised to believe responsibility mattered, and that even small debts reflected character. Across the room, Kyle remained seated even after everyone else had risen to leave. He stared at the wooden tabletop, his thoughts a swirl of embarrassment, anger, and a hollow sense of defeat. He wasn't angry at the judge. He couldn't be, because everything she said was true. Instead, he was angry at himself for letting his life collapse far enough that he'd ended up here. The bailiff approached him slowly. "Sir," he said gently, "you need to clear the courtroom." Kyle nodded but didn't rise. I didn't think it would end this way." The bailiff, an older man with a seasoned softness, sighed. "It rarely ends the way people expect. But at least now you know where you stand." Kyle finally pushed himself up and walked toward the exit, moving as if each step carried the weight of a decision he could no longer avoid. The courthouse parking lot was quiet, the sun sitting low across the horizon. Carissa was helping her mother toward their car when she noticed Kyle standing a short distance away, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't seen him. The trial had exhausted her emotionally, but her mother touched her arm again and signed a single instruction. "Talk." Carissa hesitated. "Mom, I don't know if that's a good idea." Helen signed again. "Better to end things with clarity than silence." Carissa nodded reluctantly and approached Kyle. He didn't look up until she was only a few feet away. "I didn't want this to happen," he said quietly. "Neither did we," Carissa replied. "But you left us no choice." Kyle exhaled sharply. "I wasn't trying to be a bad person." "I know," she said. "But the truth is, Kyle, you stopped trying to be a responsible one." He looked at her then, really looked, and she could see the exhaustion behind his eyes. Homelessness, underemployment, debt, bertha, shame. A crushing combination that slowly eats at a person's ability to think clearly. "I wasn't using you," he said. "No," she agreed softly. "But you weren't helping me either, or helping yourself." Silence stretched again. Then he said, "Tell your mom."
"I'm sorry."
"She heard every word you said in court," Carissa replied gently. "She may not hear sound, Kyle, but she hears intention better than most people with perfect hearing." He nodded slowly. Then Carissa stepped back, signaling the end of the conversation. "Goodbye, Kyle." He swallowed hard. "Goodbye." On the drive home, Helen sat quietly in the passenger seat, the world passing by outside her window. Carissa kept glancing at her mother, unsure what she might be thinking. Finally, Helen tapped her daughter's hand. "You did well," she signed. Carissa smiled softly. "I just wanted to protect you." "I know," her mother responded. "But remember, kindness must be balanced with wisdom." Carissa nodded. "Do you think he'll ever pay you back?" Helen paused before answering. "Yes, eventually." "Why are you so sure?" Helen smiled, a warm, patient smile. "Because guilt is a debt too, and people pay those even when they ignore the financial ones." Kyle didn't go home that afternoon, partly because he didn't really have a permanent home, and partly because he couldn't bear the weight of returning to another friend's couch with a court judgment printed in his hand. Instead, he drove aimlessly. Hours passed. The light faded. The city drifted by in streaks of headlights and neon signs. He replayed the trial again and again in his mind. He remembered the kindness of Helen, a woman who, despite her own challenges, had paid for his medical care when he was in agony. He remembered the nights he'd slept in Carissa's bed, eaten meals cooked by her mother, and sat at their table like he belonged. He remembered the moment he first felt the crack in his relationship, the moment he started believing he didn't deserve the warmth of that home. He remembered his own failures, his avoidance, his excuses, his refusal to repay even a portion of the debt. And though he hadn't expected it, the guilt hurt more than the exposed nerve ever had. He finally parked the car outside an all-night diner. Sitting inside, he scribbled numbers on a napkin. "How long?" he whispered to himself. Would it take me to pay back $828? If he cut cigarettes, he could save $50 a month. If he picked up extra shifts, maybe another 100. If he stopped eating out, maybe more. He calculated, recalculated. At this rate, maybe 5 or 6 months. And for the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of direction. Not a perfect plan, but a beginning. 2 days after the trial, Kyle sat alone in a laundromat. The spinning of machines filled the silence, a mechanical hum that felt oddly comforting. On his lap was a thin notebook, pages half filled with loose sketches, unfinished to-do lists, and reminders he never followed. He turned to a clean page. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, he began writing a letter. He didn't intend to give it to anyone. He didn't even plan to finish it. But the words came anyway. Helen, I know you didn't ask for a letter. You didn't ask for an explanation. You didn't ask for forgiveness. You just asked for the truth. His handwriting shook a little, but he kept writing. You didn't have to help me. You didn't have to pay for anything. You didn't have to care. But you did. I was scared to admit how much I needed help. I was scared to admit I was failing. And instead of facing my fear, I pretended that your kindness didn't require repayment. But it does. Kindness deserves respect. And I didn't show that. He stopped, staring at the page. Then, I will repay you. I don't know how long it will take, but I will. And even if you never read this, I needed to say it. Kyle. He folded the page carefully, slipped it between the notebook's covers, and closed it. It wasn't redemption, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, he realized, is where responsibility begins. Back at the Hahn household, Carissa sat at the dining table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. Her mother sat across from her, sorting vegetables for the evening meal with calm, precise movements. You're very quiet today, Carissa said. Helen smiled faintly and signed. Thinking. About Kyle. Helen paused, then nodded. Carissa sighed. I know I shouldn't care anymore. We're done. It's over. But I can't help wondering if we could have handled things differently. Her mother raised her hands again. You handled it with honesty. That is different from cruelty. Carissa nodded slowly. Sometimes I think I confused the two. Helen smiled warmly and signed a longer message, her movements soft and rhythmic. A person who confuses honesty with cruelty is someone who has never been cruel. You were good to him. He was lost. Sometimes lost people grab onto others so tightly that they forget to stand on their own. Carissa looked down at her tea. I just wish he had shown effort. Even a little. Helen's expression softened. He will learn. Life teaches even those who refuse to listen. Carissa chuckled quietly. You really think he'll repay you? Her mother didn't hesitate. Yes. How can you be so sure? Helen touched her chest, right above the heart. Because he looked ashamed, not angry. Kyle found work the following week. Not glamorous, not stable, but work. A small construction company needed laborers to clean job sites, haul wood, and shovel gravel. Paid hourly, paid cash. And most importantly, it was available right now. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Rick, eyed Kyle skeptically on the first day. You ever done construction? A little, Kyle said. You're not gonna vanish after 2 days, are you? No. Rick snorted. Everyone says that. Kyle lowered his eyes. I won't. The work was hard. The days were long. His arms ached. His back burned. But for the first time in months, he felt useful. And at the end of the first week, he looked at the cash in his hands and didn't think about cigarettes. Didn't think about food from diners. Didn't think about himself. He divided the bills into 2 piles. One for survival, one for the debt. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. A weight, long carried, finally beginning to lift. Helen stood at the kitchen window as the wind moved the trees outside. She couldn't hear the branches sway or the leaves rustle. But she could see movement, and she could feel the world more deeply than most. She knew the rhythm of her daughter's footsteps. She knew the vibration of the washing machine. She knew the subtle tremors of the refrigerator as it hummed. She knew the silent language of responsibility, the kind that doesn't shout or demand attention. She trusted people more than they deserved, but she also forgave people more than they expected. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up. A text message from an unknown number. All it said was, "I will start repaying next month. Ate." Helen stared at the letters for a long moment. Then she smiled, not proudly, not triumphantly, but gently, as though she had always believed this message would come. She deleted the text without showing it to Carissa. Some things, she believed, didn't need to be shared yet. 3 months passed. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily, the way growth always happens when no one is watching. Kyle mailed small payments every 2 weeks. Never late, never skipped, never accompanied by excuses or explanations. Just clean, folded bills inside plain white envelopes. He didn't sign his name. He didn't include notes. But Helen always knew. Every payment arrived with quiet sincerity, like a person knocking softly on a door they once slammed. And strangely, without ever intending to, Kyle had started rebuilding a version of himself he had never fully met before. One mild Saturday evening, just before sunset, someone knocked on the Han front door. Carissa opened it, expecting a neighbor. But it was him. Kyle stood there. Clothes clean but worn, hands calloused, eyes clearer than she remembered. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look devastated. He just looked steady. "Hi," Carissa said cautiously. A long silence followed. "I've been making payments," he said quietly. "I know. I just wanted to say the last one is coming next week. After that, I'll owe nothing." Carissa folded her arms. "You came here to announce that?" Kyle shook his head. "No. I came to apologize to you. Not just your mom." Her posture softened slightly, but she didn't speak. "I wasn't fair to you," he continued. "You helped me, and instead of stepping up, I took advantage of your patience. You had every right to walk away, and you did the right thing." Carissa exhaled. Not angrily, not dramatically, but like someone finally hearing something they had been waiting for without knowing it. "I don't hate you," she said. "I don't expect anything from you," Kyle replied. "Not friendship, not trust, nothing. I just needed to say, thank you. Both of you saved me from myself." Helen appeared quietly behind her daughter, drying her hands with a towel. Kyle straightened instinctively, as though standing in front of a judge again. Helen looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. Then she lifted her hands and signed slowly. "Are you all right now?" Kyle swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, I'm trying. Really trying." Helen smiled, small, warm, unmistakably genuine. She signed again. "Good. Life is heavy, but you carried your part." Her approval, quiet and gesture-bound, struck him deeper than any lecture could. The following week, the final payment arrived. Helen didn't tell Carissa. She simply slid the envelope into her drawer, closed it, and continued preparing dinner. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because the story no longer belonged to debts or mistakes. It belonged to closure. That night, Carissa asked casually, "Do you think he'll disappear now?" Helen signed. People who correct themselves don't disappear. They simply step into a different path. Carissa looked out the window, the streetlights stretching long shadows across the quiet road. "Do you think we'll see him again?" Helen thought for a moment, then signed. "If life intends it, yes." 6 months later, a diner on the edge of town buzzed with nighttime traffic. Truckers, college kids, late workers, all mixing under fluorescent lights. Kyle was behind the counter wearing a clean apron, refilling coffee mugs and handing plates to customers with a calm, practiced rhythm. He had gained weight. His arms were stronger. His eyes were peaceful. He didn't think about the debt anymore. He didn't think about failure. He didn't think about the version of himself he had left behind. He thought about the next shift, the next paycheck, the next sunrise. As he stepped outside during break, he looked up at the dim stars barely visible between city lights. There was no dramatic music. No applause. No witness to his progress. just a quiet man who had finally learned how to stand. He reached into his pocket, feeling the folded page, the letter he had never sent. He didn't need to send it anymore, but he kept it, not as guilt, but as proof. White medium star, the end.